for this evening's curatorial talk and the mentorship workshops that she's offering this Sunday with Or Gallery. I am presenting from not historic Kagawa House, but around the corner on the unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam people. We are located less than a kilometer from historic Cessnam, the village site on the north arm of the Fraser River. And we are pleased to partner on other occasions with the Musqueam Nation, with whom we share stories and histories. Historic Kagawa House, if we could see the next slide, please, is the childhood home of author Joy Kagawa, who lived at this house as a child until 1942, when her family and other Japanese Canadians were removed from their properties and interned in camps 100 miles east of the Pacific coast. Joy Kagawa wrote about this in her novel Obasan, and that novel is on curriculum lists and read by students and around the world. When this house was rescued from demolition in 2006, the writers and others who came around to protect the house felt that the best use for the property was to create an author residency, such as the one that Su-Ying is doing this month, and that Christian Vistan, our host, did for us last month. We've had two art curators back to back for October and November, as widening our scope of creators with who we host for paid residencies in this inspiring space. So thank you for joining us tonight, and over to Christian Vistan. Thank you.
Cool. Hi. Thank you, Anne-Marie, for that introduction. And yeah, and also thank you, Su-Ying and Anne-Marie, for having me. As Anne-Marie said, my name is Christian Vistan. I'm an artist, writer, and curator based in Vancouver and Delta on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Tsawwassen First Nations. Yeah, I did a residency last month, and I'm really happy to be helping facilitate Su-Ying's talk tonight. And before we begin, I'm going to do a brief visual description for any folks with low or no vision. Yeah, so I'm a Filipino person in their late 20s with shoulder-length hair and wireframe glasses, and I'm sitting in a dimly lit room. There's a lamp and a really faint painting in the back. I also want to take this moment to let you know that tonight's meeting is being recorded for Su-Ying's personal archives. As well, there will be a moment after the talk for questions, so I invite you to type them in the chat and we can read them and discuss after. And with that, I'll introduce Su-Ying. Su-Ying Lee is an independent curator living in Toronto. She has worked across Canada in Hong Kong, Mexico City, and Quezon City in Metro Manila, Philippines. For more information, you can visit her website, su-yinglee.com. Yeah, and I'll pass it over to her. You're muted, Su-Ying.
Thanks, Christian and Anne-Marie. I'm Su-Ying, and I'm going to do a brief visual description for anyone who might need it. I'm a middle-aged Chinese woman with short black hair. I have on thick black framed glasses, a white blouse, and I'm here at historic Joy Kagawa House in a room with a bookshelf full of books behind me. As Christian mentioned, I'm a settler on the land covered by Treaty 13, as well as other unceded and currently contested land. It's also known as Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited to this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Toronto continues to be the living and meeting place of Indigenous peoples from Turtle Island and beyond. And just sharing some references here for anyone who wanted to know more. So I wanted to do something a little bit unconventional to start off the talk, and that's talk about finances. And I wanted to do that because I work independently. And I've been to talks where independent curators talk about their work, especially international work, as if it's, you know, very effortless and they just have the resources to fly from one end of the world to the other. And it seems very exotic and glamorous and mysterious. And when I was in graduate school, we had a visiting curator from abroad come do a talk, and she said, you know, people ask me what institution I work for. I am the institution. And that felt really, in some ways, condescending and overblown, and also really opaque. And, you know, maybe she has the resources of an entire institution. But I also want to take the taboo away from talking about salaries and finances. So I own my own home, and I paid off all my student loans. So as you know, in a major city like Toronto or across Canada, if you've paid off your student loans, then you're ahead. And if you can even get together the down payment for a home, then you're way ahead. And that happened for me when both my parents died and left me a small inheritance. So in around 2013 to 2015, maybe, I left my last permanent position, and that salary paid $40,000 a year, which was very difficult to live on in a major city. So I renovated my home and built a unit that I Airbnb or rent out for short-term rentals. So that's the bulk of where my salary comes from. And curatorial salary, as you can see, is at the bottom. It's the least of it. When I travel, that's often self-funded if I'm prospecting in an area where I think there might be artists or a creative community that I'm interested in. But once I form relationships and find something that I want to investigate deeper, then I will apply for Arts Council grants. I'm going to talk briefly about some exhibitions and move through them kind of quickly. The ones that I have selected talk about my interests and values, but I want to move on to current research. So this might be a bit brief. This exhibition, Explorers and Dandies in an Open Letter to Canada Post, was in 2008 when I worked as assistant curator at the Art Gallery of Mississauga, a regional gallery outside of Toronto. I was asked to curate a permanent collection exhibition, and I found a suite of lithographs by then deceased Streetsville artist Frederick Hagen. And this suite of lithographs was the basis of a series of postage stamps that Canada Post commissioned in 1986 and released between 86 and 89. And they were titled Exploration of Canada. So that's them on the left. As you know, the narrative of a vast land awaiting colonial shaping and Indigenous people variously being romanticized, portrayed as inconsequential or in need of European civilizing is a large part of Canadian art history. Canada's national creation myth of white European settlers discovering Canada was even stronger in settler minds at the time of the exhibition in 2008. When I saw Frederick Hagen's lithographs, I asked myself, what artists might Canada Post not be aware of? And what artist should they appoint, the next postage stamp artist? and what artist could complicate Canadian history. So I approached Kent Monkman and invited him to be part of this two-person exhibition. Kent Monkman is a queer artist of Indigenous descent. And we worked to kind of shake up the institution of Canada Post. I sent a letter to Canada Post asking them to appoint Monkman as the next official postage stamp artist. And I designed the invitation card. This was in the day when there were still physical invitation cards, so that people could rip off half of it and send it to Canada Post, also adding their voices to the petition to appoint Monkman official postage stamp artist. Canada Post didn't respond to my letter or any of the petitions, so we decided to use the apparatus that was available to us. This is a service that Canada Post has, picture postage. You can send them a photograph of something that's meaningful to you, and they'll make it into usable postage. So Kent and I decided to use that to create a usable multiple. And the image on the right is Kent's alter ego, Mischief Eagle Testicle. So that image that we first submitted was deemed inappropriate. And then we sent them the image on the left of two lacrosse players, which was also deemed inappropriate. And I phoned Canada Post and got passed around quite a bit, but nobody ever gave me an answer and spoke to me about why these images were deemed inappropriate. So I've done a number of projects outside the gallery environment as well. The Good Host was my Master of Visual Studies thesis project. The project was looking at personal agency in public space. And it was mainly supported by the Blackwood Gallery at the University of Toronto in Mississauga. It took place in 3 public locations in Toronto. On the facade of the Blackwood Gallery, the Museum of Contemporary Canadian Art also provided some space, and in a revolving door in Toronto's Metro Hall. Under New Management is a project that I co-curated with Suzanne Cart. And this came about when we both worked at the Art Gallery of Mississauga, and she was the head of outreach. And we had a lot of discussions about more experimental forms of outreach and audience engagement. So this was an independent project outside of our work at that organization. We rented a storefront and we hung a banner that said under New Management so that it would be vague. So there was a few iterations. One was a convenience store, which was a group exhibition. The second was a business gone bust. And then the third, we also had a lab on-site service that made bespoke souvenirs. And one of the iterations was this video rental store. So the video rental store allowed people to rent artists' video on the honor system basis. And we asked them to pay what they wanted. So, and we also suggested that it would be good if they paid something that would be given to the artist to reflect the viewer's experience with the video. So some examples where people gave books or videos of their own. Some people gave crafts, baked goods. The video rental store portion's gone on to travel to 8 venues across Canada, including Access Gallery in Vancouver. Currently, it's in its final iteration at Eastern Edge and St. John's, Newfoundland. And on December 4th, when it closes, we're retiring the project. I've also installed work on my home property in Toronto in the laneway. I initiated this at a time when I wanted to curate something, but I didn't have a platform. I wasn't working for any organization, and I didn't want to wait for an offer of an opportunity or employment. So this piece is called Flipping Properties. It's by Jimenez Lai and his studio called Bureau Spectacular, and it's what he describes as super furniture, something that's too big to be furniture and too small to be a building. So it was in the iconic shape of a house, you know, like when a child draws a house. But on the inside, instead of four smooth planes, it's articulated with different shapes. The idea being that if you flipped the building, you could use it for different purposes, such as sitting, resting, a bookshelf, a set of stairs. It was in 3 pieces that were moved into place, but could also be reconfigured. How to make space was shown in a public walkway in Hong Kong, and it was about the spatial strategies of migrant domestic workers there. It was a small project that was in part financed by Apex Art in New York through their international program that allows curators to have projects anywhere in the world. So even though it was a small project, we felt it was important to contribute to the artists' production budgets. One of the artists was Stephanie Komalang, and she created her film Come to Me Paradise during visits to Hong Kong and debuted it at the exhibition. I've always been interested in food as a racialized immigrant for what it said about me, what it said about my family, my identity, and a sense of belonging. This is a project consisting of 3 events that I curated at Obrera Centro in Mexico City. Obrera Centro is an organization that has presentation space, artist studios, a tool lending library, workshops, seminars, but critical to their space is a production kitchen, or sorry, a professional level kitchen. They find that kind of a foundational to their work. So this project, in short, was a series that takes off from ideas of wisdom of the palate and gut and ancestral wisdom and cultural knowledge within foodways, because it's been said that the gut is the second brain. The Camillas Triennial takes place in Quezon City, Manila. It's an independent event founded by Patrick Cruz, who is my co-curator along with Allison Collins. Artists arrive a few weeks prior. Some made work in response to the locations, others brought existing work. The 2-week triennial included 2 exhibition venues, 3 performance events, 2 screenings, an impromptu music jam, and a game called Flex. The project's physical center is Patrick's maternal family home. This space also informs the values that we hold, our creative and logistical approaches, and the questions we consider. With their origins in the domestic, we exist in contrast to other reoccurring, powerful art world events. For me, this means being very deliberate about evolving a fairly young organization. I value professionalism, efficiency, and things done well, but I set out to change how we define professionalism. For example, recognizing that each participant comes from different circumstances and lived experiences, creating a sustainable work culture, and scrutinizing and sometimes turning down conventional opportunities for organizational growth. This is the courtyard space where work is installed just inside the green gates that you saw in the previous slide. And here's the gallery entrance. This is a view of the gallery, which has been previously living space and business space. Another installation view in the gallery. This is a game called Flex that we played in the courtyard, and it was led by one of our partners, Lod Nadito. A view of our music night, live performance night at Green Papaya. Green Papaya was started in 2000 and is one of the oldest artist-run centers in the Philippines. So each of the curators selected our own artists to work with. I'd been visiting Mexico City frequently over a period of about 3 years and invited artists that I'd formed relationships with there. My invitation was based on the historic relationship created through the Manila Delay on Trade route. Artists were not asked to make work directly based on this. They were just invited to come to Manila and be in the place. Not unexpectedly, there's a lot that they found shared between locations to this day, including language, religion, spatial design, food, material culture, and a lot more, but there's also a lot of contrast. So this is just a teaser about an upcoming exhibition that Amy Lam and I are working on for the Richmond Art Gallery in 2022. Amy's coming in December, and we're going to be researching towards this together in Richmond and in Vancouver. I'm particularly interested in early Western colonial agriculture and its relationship to processes of racialization and dehumanization, where and when that becomes institutionalized and how it creates categories of identity, affected human health and environmental degradation. I'm working in a focused way on these particular aspects, which I'll talk more about in my current research, but I also love tangential stories like the story of Ludi the dog, who will be part of Amy's project. Ludi's story is amazing, amusing, tragic, and also infuriating as an example of Western imperialism and racist hypocrisy. If you think about the word loot and the way that it's been instrumentalized against racialized communities, particularly Black communities, especially during uprising and riots, and Queen Victoria made a joke of the plundering of China by naming her dog Ludi. If you're interested in more information about the dog and British looting, there's a podcast series called What the British Stole. So recent concerns that led to my current research. During the pandemic, there was a lot of intensity and a lot of judgment around food, and particularly wet markets. And there was a lot of people calling for the destruction of wet markets in China, and I guess wet markets that they perceive to exist across Asia. And I believe a lot of the people who demanded the end to Chinese markets would consider French markets, such as these, the epitome of food culture. If European, exotic meats and congealed old milk is appealing and coveted even. And when they called for the destruction of Chinese wet markets, they were really calling for the destruction of a way of living and of infrastructure and social structure. So some of the people's anger was inflamed by the idea that Chinese were eating wild animals, and that coronavirus was passed on by a Chinese woman who ate bat soup. And this is a story that's since been considered false, although I don't care what people consider to be meat. The truth is the wild animals sold in the market in Wuhan are farmed, the same as wild and exotic meats such as ostrich, alligator, boar, bison, elk, pheasant, rabbit, and more are farmed and sold in North America. These are two Canadian exotic game retailers, and the third is a horse butcher in France. And of course, racism and imperial attitudes show up in ideas around who should be allowed to do what to wild animals. So these topics I've been talking about are longstanding ideas that there are righteous foods and righteous people, and other people who don't eat in certain ways cause disease, and racialized people embody disease and are subhuman. I don't want to dwell on coronavirus, but that intense period of scrutiny and misunderstanding and racism around food motivated me to more deeply research early Western colonial agriculture's relationship to the formation of these ideas. So as I mentioned, I've always been interested in food for what it said about my identity and my belonging. So this is kind of a chaotic map of my current research and my interests. I hope it makes some kind of sense. This at the top, plantation agriculture, early Western colonial agriculture, and also our modern plantation agriculture or corporate agriculture. ongoing Western imperialism have all been built on the transatlantic slave trade and the related racialization and dehumanization that was used to justify it. Those have been written into laws, medical theories, scientific theories, tropical medicine, and also used to support indentured labor, migrant labor, considering certain groups of people to be made for labor. Also, colonial agriculture, plantation agriculture has contributed to monocropping, the degradation of soil and land, encroachment on animal habitats, the climate crisis, environmental racism. And all of this could be summed up as plantation logics. And there's been a term coined called the Plantation Ocean, which is used as an alternative to the Anthropocene. And when we have extractive resources, such as plantation agriculture, animals lose their habitats and they have to move closer to cities and humans. And that's when zoonotic diseases get passed between humans and animals. Zoonotic diseases such as coronavirus. So I want to emphasize that this is an ongoing research project, and the artworks that I'm going to show you next are not part of any planned exhibition or confirmed exhibition. This work by Bo Wong is about how tropical climate created strong fear around anxiety in the British troops who were stationed in Hong Kong after the Opium Wars. The 19th century myth of miasma, bad air believed to cause epidemic diseases, was part of theories of tropical medicine and was believed to hover over Hong Kong Island. The British, eager to expand their botanical empire, employed local artists to reproduce images for study. So this work examines the peculiar dynamics between imperialism, scientific research, race, and the right to look in the 19th century in Canton. This glass enclosure is the precursor to the terrarium invented by Nathaniel Ward. The case was first tested for bringing plant specimens across the ocean in 1833 and enabled the eventual colonial production of tea, rubber, quinine, and other agricultural products. Quinine, made from bark of the cinchona plant from the tropical Andean forest of South America, is used as a cure for malaria, allowing the British to expand their empire in the tropics. Prior to the invention of the case, plants and seeds that were smuggled out of locations couldn't make it across back to Britain. They wouldn't survive the journey. This work by Hori Minaya is called Tropicon, and it refers to the greenhouse and its precursor, the Wardian case, both instrumental in the agenda of New World expansion. It also reminds us of national botanical gardens, such as Kew Gardens in London, England. Botanical gardens, like museums, are inextricably entwined with imperialism. Exotic plants were collected not just for aesthetic reasons, but with economic purposes in mind. These botanical gardens have offered visitors a narrative of the white man's supposed discovery of species, but they've also obliterated longer and richer cultural histories of humans' relationships to plants. Here, Minaya foils botanical collections. The plants on the exterior wrap are pixelated to block identification and extraction. The greenhouse is covered in a one-way vinyl protecting the interior from view. Those on the inside can see clearly out. Maria Magdalena Campos Pons was born in Cuba in 1959 and was raised on a sugar plantation in a family of mixed Nigerian, Hispanic, and Chinese roots. A mix of cultures that's not uncommon in locations where colonial plantation owners, slaves, and indentured laborers have existed. In her exhibition, Alchemy of the Soul, the sweet scent of sugar being distilled into rum pervaded into the gallery space. The artist's work reminds me of how plantation systems pervade our history and everybody's present day reality. Sugar and its consequences surround us to the point where it barely registers for many. Christopher Columbus made his second voyage across the Atlantic Ocean in 1493, bringing sugarcane stalks from the Spanish Canary Islands to what's now known as the Dominican Republic. By the mid-16th century, the Portuguese had brought sugarcane to Brazil, and soon after, the British, Dutch, and French were growing it in their colonies. Sugar has been called white gold and the engine that fueled the transatlantic slave trade, because although the cane grew well in the New World, refined sugar was a luxury product due to the backbreaking and dangerous labor needed to process it. Sugar slavery was the key component in what historians call the triangle trade, a network whereby slaves were sent to work on New World plantations. The product of their labor was sent to European capitals to be sold, and other goods were brought to Africa to trade for more slaves. These are two artists who are making work about environmental degradation. The project Machinique by Martinican artist Hervé Baez takes its name from the combination of machine and Martinique. Baez builds metal structures in the shape of a map of Martinique and fills them with cane bagasse. Bagasse is the pulpy, fibrous material that remains after crushing sugar cane. It's been found useful as biofuel and also as a building material, which obscures the fact that its production has degraded the land in the first place. So the idea, I think, similar to greenwashing, or maybe it could be greenwashing, considered greenwashing. Teresita Fernandez is an American artist of Cuban descent. Her work, such as this hanging palm tree, hanging from a noose, talks about the environmental devastation and exploitation of the Caribbean. Her depleted dead tree is contrary to the lush palms that are synonymous with the promotion of the tourist industry, something that fruit companies have taken a historic lead in. The United Fruit Company, now Chiquita Brands International, was a US corporation that traded in tropical fruit grown on Latin American plantations and sold in the US and Europe. The company increased profits and decreased shipping costs by creating a tourist industry. The original Chiquita banana commercial, 1944, you can watch it on YouTube if you like, features a feminized banana descending from a steamship, singing and dancing for a group of suited white men. Her fellow bananas are depicted lounging on an equatorial beach, happily awaiting inevitable visitation and consumption. In addition to transporting tourists, Chiquita offered plantation tours promising a glimpse of exotic workers content in the service of producing healthy fruit for Westerners. This was an area staged for tourists, but the actual exploitative work of producing bananas was hidden from view. Another example of fruit company involvement in tourism and imperialism. To this day, visitors to Hawaii can visit the Dole Plantation, a symbol of conquest. It was founded by Anglo-American James Dole, who had a part in overthrowing the Hawaiian monarchy in 1893 in an imperial move to impose Western ideas about land, property, and ownership. The history of the United Fruit Company is too long and problematic for me to detail now, but they operated on imperialism, involved in Guatemala's postal service, railroad, financing a military coup in Honduras, denouncing the Guatemalan government's labor code as communist, and much more, while perpetuating human rights abuses. Even as the rebranded Chiquita Brands International, the company paid nearly $2 million to right-wing death squads targeting labor union leaders in Colombia. So for North Americans, the fruit company meant romantic tropical cruises and also a source of Navy ships that helped America's victory in World War II. The allure of tropical vacations created a dilemma because of how race is conceived and skin color is conceived of. So being brown was considered bad, and brown people carried disease, as I discussed previously, yet were able to produce healthy food. And sunshine made you brown, but visiting the sun for modest periods of time was sold as beneficial. Tropical people like Ms. Chiquita and her friends were awaiting to provide an array of touristic pleasures. Gonzalo Fuenmere is an artist who was born in Colombia. He uses shades of black and white in his work to refuse the expectation he encountered beginning in art school, that as a Latin American, he ought to be using bright colors. These images bring something similar to mind, the expectation that those who perform the labor of picking fruit are servile, content, though lively when needed to entertain, produce your food, and welcome you to the tropics. They'll sing and dance for you like the animated Ms. Chiquita, Carmen Miranda, or Josephine Baker. The image on the left is making direct reference to Josephine Baker's banana skirt. The skirt's phallic appendages evoked France's colonial involvement in both the rubber and banana trades. It seemed to present Baker as a colonial sex object, but in doing so, highlighted the exploitative nature of the economic and political orders that made her one. Guatemalan artist Naufis Ramirez Figueroa works with the memory of several generations of his ancestors who worked on banana plantations and endured very hard living conditions. In his performance, The Banana Ripens for You Under the Weight of Your Sweet Love, the artist slept holding a bunch of bananas for 2 weeks in a gallery. With the passing of time, the warmth of his body, the bananas ripened to the point of being ready to eat, at which point he shared them with spectators in the gallery. Through this work, the artist questions how Central America's economic dependence on the banana market dominated by the USA has affected the psyche and ethos of the region's inhabitants. This is my first Zoom talk. It's very strange to just have silence and not see anybody's faces. I just feel like it's just me, blah, 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 talking a lot. Thanks, Christian. This is the Empire Remains shop by Cooking Sections, which was a series of exhibitions, programming, performances, and discussions. The Empire shops were actually a marketing campaign rather than actual shops. They were developed in 1920s London. The campaign aimed to boost British consumption of foodstuffs from the colonies and overseas territories. The Empire Remains shop is a series of public programs, as I mentioned, that speculates on the possibility and implications of selling back the remains of the British Empire in London today. The project traces the contemporary history of imperial food commodities, as well as the economies and aesthetics that emerged from them. It follows the development of global food networks alongside the invention of the exotic and the tropical. In this installation by British Montserrat-born artist Veronica Ryan, handfuls of seeds, dried or reproduced in clay, are suspended in crocheted tubes and sewn into fabric. They resemble fishing nets or webbing or waves. The drift seeds refer to how bodies and plants are moved by the entwined cultural and ecological forces of colonialism, capitalism, and the related climate crisis. For Ryan, in botanical terms, these plants are diasporic species, both a metaphor for and a physical continuation of the Afro-Caribbean diaspora. This work brings to mind the so-called Columbian Exchange, or rather the survival of indigenous and African diasporic people despite the Columbian Exchange. The term Columbian Exchange refers to the widespread transfer of animals, plants, culture, technologies, disease, people, and ideas between the Old World, Europe, Africa, and Asia, and the New World, the Americas, in the decades following the arrival of Columbus in the Americas in 1492. The exchange devastated the population of the Americas and led to widespread slavery of Africans. As professor of inhuman geography, Catherine Youssef writes, tying the Anthropocene to conquest makes explicit the colonial relationship. but how does the rupture of bodies, flesh, and worlds become buried in the notion of exchange and contact? The collision of the old and the new, as Simon L. Lewis and Mark A. Maslin calls it in their book, The Human Planet, How We Created the Anthropocene, covers over the friction of a less smooth, more corporeal set of racialized violences. In the language of exchange, it might be assumed that something was given rather than just taken. So this diagram and this term also entirely fail to recognize the contributions of Indigenous, African, and other spatially transported unfree laborers. In Yang Eison's Our Rice series refers to the strategy African women had for saving seeds to prepare for their future as kidnapped people. African women hid rice seeds and other grains in their braids and their children's braids to prepare for the possibility of being taken into the slave trade or being separated. They also hid beans, other grains, and small plant cuttings. During the years of several slavery rebellions in the Caribbean, the practice was taken up by the Maroons, who escaped the plantations to start their own settlements where they grew food and lived independently. The rice that's now popular, Asian rice, wasn't introduced to America until the late 1840s by Chinese laborers and not cultivated until 1912. Before that, rice plantations in the USA were only possible because of the seeds and the expertise of the women who practiced this braiding tactic. In fact, an incredible amount of agricultural knowledge was facilitated successful crops and food processing is owing to African unfree laborers who were never credited or compensated. There was a lot of other works that I could have shown you, but that would have taken up a lot of time. These topics I know can be really saddening or infuriating, so I wanted to end with this work. Pharrelli Baez is an artist born in the Dominican Republic who casts diasporic histories into an imaginative realm, reworking visual references drawn from the past to explore new possibilities for future. With the goal to reclaim power, Baez overlays figuration, symbolic imagery, and abstract gesture into large-scale reproductions of found maps and documents. She populates these historically loaded representations of space with change-making creatures, whose hybrid forms incorporate folkloric and literary references, textile patterns, plant life, and wide-ranging emblems of healing and resistance to present alternative universes. I also wanted to provide some free resources for anybody who's interested in reading more. So most of this you should be able to access for free on the internet, except for maybe JSTOR. JSTOR articles are free through the Toronto Public Library. I looked and they're not available through the Vancouver Public Library, but if somebody really wants them, I could send them to you, but the rest are free and accessible. And that's it.
Cool. Thanks, Su-Ying. Yeah, so if anyone has some questions, feel free to just drop them in the chat and I can read them out loud. Yeah, I could start with a question. Yeah, I guess I was kind of yeah, like it's great to see all the work that you've done. Like I think because I met you at in the Philippines during Kamiya, so it's cool to see kind of like the stuff before that and what you're doing and what you're interested in now. I guess something that was like I was kind of curious about was it like the earlier stuff that you showed has such a strong sense of place, or like it feels like a lot of, I mean, you were like engaging kind of like these spaces that are outside gallery spaces, but it also seemed like, I don't know, even like your backyard or something, you know, like it's, I think there was like such a strong yeah, place, sense of place in them. And I guess like in in like your current research, it's so much bigger, or like it's about these like kind of like really expansive like exchanges and economies. So I guess like I was just kind of like wondering about, I don't know, like place in relation to like the current research, and like if, yeah, like I guess like how do you place it, or like where, even like if you were to do an exhibition, like where would it be?
What would the exhibition be?
Yeah, or like, or even kind of like, I guess like I'm thinking about placing like a more kind of poetic, but also just like, yeah, I think you feel free to like take it anywhere you want, but I'm really like curious about place as like kind of a curatorial, I mean like for my like own practice, it's like such a uh it like provides me so much context in how I work. So
Yeah, I think, I mean, for the earlier work, working outside the gallery, I think that comes from the fact that I had a whole career before I studied art. So I went to undergrad when I was 30, and before that, I had worked in social services. So I think that that really informed the way I work, in that I consider what like kind of general audiences are interested in, and not so much I don't want to use the word pandering, but I'm not so much focused on the art world and their expectations. Like I think a lot of, thinking about what people might ask for, want, or need from when I worked in social services carried over. In terms of this current research, I'll show it wherever it makes sense. But like literally this research affects every single person's life every day. Like, how we approach disease, the current climate crisis, food, like every single person's food. Unless you grow it yourself, and maybe even when you do, there's not a single food that's conflict free. There's deep history behind food and how it's come to us. Also, there's an incredible amount of resources used to produce food, a lot of human exploitation, not only in the past, currently. If you research your food, even if you grow it yourself, whose land are you growing it on?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah. There is someone put something in the chat, I can read it. So this is from Anonymous. So great to hear a bit more about your work. Could you talk a bit about how some of your ideas do arrive at institutional homes? I know it must take a similar kind of care to arrive at the right places. It would be great to hear more about how this relationships get built. And it's from Allison.
I mean, a lot of, for example, the video store was just responding to call for submissions. Otherwise, obviously there are a lot of advantages to going to art school. You form a lot of relationships. You form relationships that you take into your career. And when you're part of a community, you meet people, you have discussions, you meet people who have overlapping interests. So I think it's through that community. So, two things: call for submissions and through community.
Yeah. Yeah, I think calls. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity in the calls. I'll read another one. How important is it to encourage sustainability within creative spaces? How would you reconcile with a project that may not be seen as sustainable? That's from Katrina M.
Depends what you mean by sustainability. Do you mean environmental sustainability? Do you mean, I mean, I think I've been thinking a lot about, and other people have been thinking a lot about sustainability in terms of human resources and doing more with less, which has been a longstanding practice that is totally unsustainable. So maybe you can elaborate on what you mean by sustainability.
Yeah, she's saying specifically about environmental sustainability.
Okay. Sorry, can you read the question again now that I understand?
Yes. How important is it to encourage sustainability within creative spaces? How would you reconcile with a project that may not be seen as sustainable?
Well, I think it's really important, but I think that it's harder to bring in to larger institutions. I think that smaller institutions or collectives such as the one that I have with Patrick and Allison, there's a lot of opportunities there for us to try sustainable methods. It's about willingness. I don't know. I mean, I do have conversations with people I'm working with, but I think sometimes bringing up the questions are useful. As an individual, I definitely have some ways of working that I might insist upon. And I think that, again, that can introduce ideas to institutions or to organizations. And that can be really useful. I don't want to discount how useful that can be, but I also have very limited power.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people who are actually looking at sustainability in meaningful ways. One of them being Suzanne Cart, who works at the Art Gallery of Burlington. She's the senior curator there. She's got an ongoing project that looks at reuse of materials. And if you work with her on an exhibition, as I have, she really forefronts that in the way that she works with, guest curators, with artists, with partners. She provides a lot of options for reuse, which I admire. And there's also a new organization out of, I think some of you know what I'm talking about, but my mind is a blank right now. The Center for Sustainable Curating. Am I getting the name right? Can somebody comment?
I don't know that. I can Google it.
They're looking broadly at the idea of sustainability, so not just materials, but also, wider ideas of sustainability and impact. There was also, I'm not sure if it's still on, but an amazing exhibition at the Art Museum at the University of Toronto called, I think it was called Plastic Hearts or Plastic Hearts. It was kind of taking off from the idea of the use of plastic in art production and exhibition production. And they did a lot of really innovative things that I'm still thinking about. And it's one of the first times that I felt like an exhibition did more than just talk about an issue through aestheticization, because it's very easy to bring up some issues. And, when you look at the artworks, they're a highly aestheticized representation of an issue, and then you don't really think about solutions. But in this exhibition, there were things like the walls were repaired after the previous exhibition. There was garbage bagged up in the gallery that represented the amount of garbage that was produced in the production of the exhibition. It looked at the conservation of plastic works and what artists from previous generations thought about the use of plastic. It was, I would recommend it. It really gave me a lot to think about and really challenged my idea of exhibition making.
Cool. Yeah. There are some links in the chat about the exhibition that Su-Ying was mentioned. There's another question here from Sarah. She says, I'm really interested in the labor of research and how that gets taken up in different institutional contexts. You gave us a real gift in this talk. can you comment a bit on the relationship between research and its insistences in your work?
What do you mean by insistences?
Uh,
I'm trying to figure out how to unmute myself here. Thank you.
okay.
Yeah, because I guess when I say insistences, I'm thinking of the ways in which like research kind of pushes us creatively to like, you gave us some maps, right? And some drawings, and you gave us some threads, and then they all come together in a creative way differently for those of us who are working in different genres, right? I'm working sort of half between what might be called the art world and the university. And I find there's always this kind of struggle to talk about research and for it to be mobilized, right, in ways that people can understand, and that so that the value is in this kind of end product. But what really struck me in your talk, and particularly because you began with, you know, this piece about labor and finances, right, and capacity and sort of the infrastructure and the logistics of doing all this work, this sort of mapping, like so to me, the labor of research is part of that. So, you know, in some institutional contexts, labor can only be recognized in these particular forms. And as an independent curator, it seems like you're doing something quite different. And even in the talk here, right, with giving us so much. So that's what I'm kind of, that's a long way of saying like what I mean by the shorthand insistences.
Well, I'm still not sure how to respond to that. I feel, you know, I really don't like professional lingo, and I have really shied away from the word research in the past. And when people have asked me, like, automatically use that kind of professional jargon, what's your research about? I thought, research, like I'm thinking about things, but I don't know, research, I don't really enjoy using that word, but I did get a Canada Council grant for research and development. So for this current research. So that's why I feel a little more comfortable, I guess, calling it research.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about the word research, right? Like what do we get to call it when we spend some time thinking about how these threads come together and doing this sort of historical labor of investigation, right? And so in what context do we call it research? And then how does that come into a curatorial practice? I guess I'm really interested in that, and particularly because you gave us so much in this talk about, you know, how those threads are weaving their ways through some of your current thinking in the projects that you're doing.
Yeah, on the one hand, I think using the word research is good because it actually says like, look, this is work and there's a long process behind it and a lot of labor behind it. You know, because there's so much idea that like culture is a hobby and fun and lucky to get to do it. But on the other hand, the word research, you know, really makes me think of, you know, universities, institutions, and that's an area that a lot of people have not been able to enter or don't want to enter. And for me, that doesn't mean that they're, you know, not legitimate, that we need to find ways for people to produce and share knowledge and recognize that there are different ways of doing that.
Yeah, I would say too that I feel like a lot of your, or like kind of like what I got from what you presented was like a lot of it comes from a really like you have like a lot of like personal investment in like the things that you're like, even I mean like even food is such a kind of like personal, like literally like embodied thing, you know. So I think I guess like I also like see it as like a way of like, I think as kind of even like as an artist, like the work that we do is just like kind of like a way for us to like understand what's happening around us. And yeah, and maybe that's like an alternative to like that kind of how we conceive of the word research. Yeah.
Thank you, Su-Ying.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, maybe we'll have time for one more question. If someone has a question.
If no one has a question, we can also end.
Yeah. Oh, I think there's some questions. What are you most excited to think about while you're out on the West Coast? Nice open question to end. It's Alison again too.
I mean, I feel like this is maybe not so much art related, but I'm really grateful to Denise at Orr and to Anne-Marie at Joy Kagawa House for giving me this opportunity. It's a really amazing way to re-enter the world outside of Toronto. I'm just seeing everything with fresh eyes. I'm excited to meet people. And I'm excited to eat a lot of food. The Chinese food here is world class, so I'll be indulging in that a lot.
I think there's one more question coming in from Katrina again.
Okay.
And yeah.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I was trying to type it out, but I was like unsure about how to frame it. So I guess it's better if I just say it. I just want to know, where do you begin to read up on, for example, like finding out more about pre-colonial crafts or arts? And like, where do you begin your research on like the effects of colonization, for example? How do you start that kind of learning? What resources do you use?
Well, I mean, I don't know where you live, Katrina, but living in Toronto, I'm really lucky that I have free access to JSTOR through the Toronto Library. So you can find a lot of free articles there. Also, if you find authors who have written books that are on topics that you're interested in and you're not ready to, buy the whole book, you can also see if they've written articles that are available to you on academic websites. And then you'll also find that, if you have topics that you're interested in, somebody's probably done an exhibition on that topic or a related topic.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I also think YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Or
Yeah.
I feel like there's so much
Yeah.
stuff on YouTube they like, I don't know.
Yes.
I personally like find a lot of kind of stuff that I usually wouldn't find like in like where I usually do like my research on YouTube, and it's
That's
like
true. Yeah, there's a lot of good sources on YouTube, but also a lot of lectures are archived on YouTube. So some of those authors that you might be interested in, often they've done a lecture somewhere or had a taped discussion with someone.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, and thank you, Su-Ying, for the talk, and thanks Anne-Marie for hosting, and Kagawa House for like having us again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna peace out too.
Okay, bye.
Bye, thanks.
Thank you.